It's time to move on to the next session, which is a chat between Thomas Dohmke and Tim here, the future of developer AI and Copilot X. So we're pleased to have Thomas joining us now. Fascinated by software development since his childhood in Germany, Thomas has built a career building tools developers love and accelerating innovations that are changing software development. Thomas is Chief Executive Officer of GitHub, where he oversaw the launch of the world's first at-scale AI developer tool, GitHub Copilot, and now GitHub Copilot X. Previously, Thomas co-founded Hockey App and led the company as CEO through its acquisition by Microsoft in 2014, and he holds a PhD in mechanical engineering from the University of Glasgow in UK. So please take it away, gentlemen.
Hi.
Hey, Thomas. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. Thank you for having me. It was fascinating to listen into the conversation. I want to open up with a thought. You know, if you pull out your calculator and you type 3 + 4 × 5, I bet you anything it does it wrong, because it adds 3 to 4 and then multiplies by 5, which is not what you learn in 2nd grade in school. And it shows you that you have to understand how the calculator works, and you have to understand how the models work to use them to the fullest extent.
That's great. So that's very relevant to the first question I was going to ask you, which is, how are these models going to change programming? Matt Welch, who's was the author of one of our early breakout bestsellers, Running Linux, back in the early 90s, now is the co-founder of a company called Fixie.ai, and he said that he believes that in the next half decade, whatever, programming as we know it will become obsolete. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's true that it will be obsolete. And if you play, with the models, whether it's Copilot, Copilot Chat, or ChatGPT today, and you ask it questions, it can synthesize a lot of code for you. Actually, over the weekend, I asked Copilot Chat to build a Pong game for me, and it's in JavaScript, and it synthesizes a lot of the JavaScript code for me. But then I still have to know that now I need an HTML file to embed that canvas, in JavaScript into HTML. And I can ask Chat to generate that HTML file for me, but I need to have a fundamental understanding of computer science, and I need to understand how these things work together to build my Pong game in the browser. And it's mind blowing, because I can do that in 3 minutes, but and then I can play, and so it takes away a lot of the boring kind of like boilerplate code. Boilerplate sucks anyway. If you've ever coded in Java, you know how many import statements you had to add, and in the early days, and then came Eclipse and other IDEs where it did this come somewhat magically for you. And now we're getting into a stage where a lot of the boilerplate is generated by large language models for me, but I'm still in charge. That's why we call it the product Copilot. I'm still the pilot, and I will be the pilot for the next decade. I'm sure of that. And maybe in a decade I'm wrong, but and then we can talk again, and we can laugh about how wrong we were with our predictions of the future. But I think that developer is still the pilot, and they will leverage assistance, how we always have done. We will leverage assistance to make our work more productive, and ultimately handle all the huge code bases that we have in the world already, and stay sane while doing so.
Yeah, it seems to me that there is this incredible productivity enhancement. But there's also, I think, an expansion of the market for programming in a way that we've seen. If you think about how few people could program back in the days when programming meant flicking a bunch of switches on the front of the computer to input, the program in binary into the hardware, and then you got assembly language, and more people could do it, but it was still challenging. And then you got low-level languages like C, and and then you get all the way up to the web, and all of a sudden people can make pretty reasonable applications without even knowing how to program, just by plugging things together, because most of the interface is human readable text in this funny markup language, and then you can call these programs that already exist, and bang, many more people can do things. And I think we're at a stage where we've just 10x the market for 10x the size, or maybe it's 100x the size of the market of people who can create applications.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been a developer for like 30 years, but as a CEO of GitHub, most of my day is not spent coding, and I do things like this event and meetings and one-on-ones and business planning and customer conversations. And then, but every now and then, I have the urge of building something, and I want to play with, Rust, for example, and having a model with me that I can ask questions and interact with is just so empowering. And the most fascinating point in time actually is when you reason with the model, and when it spits out some code and you paste it into your editor your file, and then it doesn't work, and then you say like, this doesn't work. And yesterday, I tried to center a div in an HTML file, and that's one of the hardest programming challenges, centering a div. I still have figured that out. And it gave me some code, but it didn't actually center the div. And I told it, hey, this didn't actually work. And then it says, oh, I apologize. Here's another solution you can try. And it's this, I remember when I was a kid in the 80s and 90s, I didn't have, any internet, anyone to ask. I was just sitting at home, and you get frustrated in the evening because you cannot solve your issues. And now these models give every student, every 6-year-old an assistant on the side that they can code with and can ask questions. And really, if you think about schools, if you think about universities, a teacher, professor can never individually coach every single student. That's what we would love to have, but really the teacher is in front of a class of 30 or 100 people, and so having an assistant that the student can take home with and then explore the topics that they learned in school. And hopefully the teachers are coaching the kids in the future of how to use these tools in a responsible way, and how they learn how to identify what's right and what's wrong, both in code and in other information you can get, and how you can kind of probe the model of figuring out whether the answer was actually the right answer or not. That, I think, is the future of learning. And I think it will be incredibly empowering. It will allow so many more people, whether it's 6-year-old or whether it's 40-year-old, to learn technology, to interact with technology, and whether it's writing a simple script or building the app, or there's this startup here in the US called Runway ML, and they let you render little movies. You build a little storybook, and then it renders a movie, which is a different form of creation than what ChatGPT does today, but incredibly fascinating. In my head, there's going to be a point in time when I can render all the stories that my dad told me, from the 40s and 50s, into a movie that I can show my kids, and basically show them what life was like when there was no computer, no freezer. In fact, there was no heat, and people in Germany had to walk into the forest and collect wood. And that's, we sometimes think that's 1,000 years ago. That's barely 100 years ago, right? That we had no heat in houses, and the only way to, and so telling those stories, with AI, being able to visualize this in a little Pixar movie is going to be incredibly, empowering and democratizing creation.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about having this, companion teacher. It really is interesting because it isn't just programming. Obviously, I know Tyler Cowen, the famous economist, said he's working on how to teach yourself economics with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Piece, and I don't know what he's thinking, but I can easily imagine it. You go, okay, have a debate between John Maynard Keynes and Milton Friedman about the causes of inflation, and you're going to get something original and interesting, and then you ask some follow-up questions, and you're going to understand something in a way that we just, before, everything had to be canned. Somebody had to pre-make it up, and now it's just this dynamic exploration of a topic. And anyway, I think we're in this golden age of invention of new styles of pedagogy.
And it's not only economics. You don't even have to go into these complex topics. I learned English in school. German is my native language. I often have situations in life where I can't, what's this? How do you say that in English? We can now just go into GPT-4 and say, and you can even say it in German because the model speaks all kinds of languages, and say, how do we say that in English? Of what's that word like, and soon enough we will have our AirPods in our ears, and I will speak to you in German, and in your ears you will hear me with my voice speaking English with an American accent, and you will speak German to me, right? The universal translator. That's not that far away. We will need AirPods, but other than that, I think or whatever headphones you have, but other than that, I think we're going to see that in the next 5 years, that we can speak, and communication between humans is the worst thing ever, and in sense of misunderstandings, and so having that available will be incredibly empowering for the world.
Yeah, I think it's not all going to get invented by the big companies. It's going to be invented in an entrepreneurial explosion.
Yeah.
So let me talk about productivity. When we talked previously, you had pointed out, how much of the code that's submitted to GitHub now has been created with Copilot, which is a sign that people are just finding it just this useful productivity aid. Can you give us an update on how that's happening?
Yeah, so we track in our telemetry how often developers press the tab key when they're using Copilot autocompletion, and then we measure in that file, how much code was written by Copilot and how much was there before from the developer. And there's always obviously a certain uncertainty in that measurement, but from what we see from the data, it's 46% of the code in those files where Copilot is enabled was written or suggested by AI, and I think that's half effectively. That's mind-blowing in itself. It's for Java, it's actually over 60%, which goes back to my joke earlier about all the import statement, all the Java doc lines and whatnot, right? Where you have programming languages with lots of boilerplate, you will get lots of value out of AI. Similar for unit tests, a lot of unit tests that you're writing every single day are very much standardized stuff, empty string, nil value, some large integer. A lot of the unit testing by design is repetitive. And so we're seeing, lots of productivity gains from that. We did a case study where we asked developers to build an HTTP web server, and half the group had Copilot and the other half wasn't allowed to use Copilot. And the group with Copilot was 55% faster. And they got it done in like an hour and 10 minutes, and the other group was 2 hours, 40 minutes. Now you ask, the normal developer, they're like, HTTP web server, easy enough. I go on GitHub or Stack Overflow, I can, O'Reilly, I can figure that out. That code is available, but it shows you kind of like how powerful it is to just have that in your editor and not constantly context switching between the thing you're building and the information you have available in the browser or in a book. And not only were they faster, but also the group with Copilot had a higher success rate. They got it done in 78%, versus 70% for the group without Copilot.
Yeah. What do you think about, obviously, this is a power tool. If you're an experienced developer, you can just blaze through things. But if you're a beginning developer, there's been all of these, entry-level, schools trying to teach people to become a web developer, front-end developer, whatever. Is this going to end up replacing a lot of those low-end jobs, or is it going to be an enhancer for them too?
I think it's going to be an enhancer because it allows people to up-level, upskill much faster. If you look into chat scenarios, it's not only that you can ask it to help you write code, you can ask it, this morning I saw a demo video about using Copilot Chat to fix a SQL injection bug. So, a code scanning tool had found a SQL injection, and it shows you it has found a SQL injection, and it says SQL injection, right? Now I have to figure out what the hell is SQL injection. And you can just go into Copilot Chat and ask it, hey, what's SQL injection? And give me an example for SQL injection. And then how do I fix my SQL injection? And then you can, what are similar bugs that might have in my code base? And so people, that in the past were constrained by what they have learned in school are now able to explore more topics. And I think actually schools are going to change, that the school will focus less on teaching all these topics and more about how you can teach yourself to learn about this. And they will basically become, a teacher will become your coach. And it's a bit like the soccer coach or the football coach. That the coach doesn't play the game for you. You play the game, and you have to rehearse with the ball or the guitar, whatever you're learning every single day to get better and become a professional. And I think, our teachers will become more coaches that tell us how to leverage the tools that are available to us to rehearse and to get better at what we're doing, and we will get better while doing it. And that's literally, I think, when people are skeptical about ChatGPT or Copilot, my best advice I can give them, just try it out, play with this, and don't be, if you're skeptical, tell it that you're skeptical about it. That's those are the moments where like, holy shit, it just apologized to me and told me that it was wrong, and here's a better answer. And you got to get yourself into that mode. And I think that's where, whether it's coding schools, whether it's elementary schools, they all need to get into that mode where they coach folks, to how to use the chat function, the chat agent, the model, and how to become a better developer or better writer or better, creator.
Yeah. What do you think about the copyright issues involved in these models? Do you have any thoughts? Clearly you've sucked down a lot of code. A lot of it is open source, but some of it may not be. And it gets regurgitated by the model. Is that copyright violation? Is it fair use? What should we be doing about that?
It's an interesting topic, and I heard some of the thoughts that you have voiced earlier, and I saw the chat as well. I think the first thing as software developers that we should admit is that we have been doing that for the last 30 years. We've been always copying code from elsewhere. I've done. I was on the Microsoft side doing the GitHub acquisition, and my own company got acquired by Microsoft, and I have done about a dozen or so acquisitions at Microsoft. And every time we do these acquisitions, we want to make sure that the code base that we're acquiring from a company is not full of copyright issues. So we contract with an external expert company. They see the code in a data room, and then they scan, for copyright violations. And you know what? They're finding tons of code copied from O'Reilly books, copied from Stack Overflow, copied from blog posts with no clear attribution, copied from open source repositories. It's not, whole files. It's a 3-line here, it's a quick sort algorithm there. So let's just admit, together in a developer conversation that we've been doing that for the last 30 years. That isn't to say that this isn't a problem that we need to solve, but I think, we need to be a little bit careful of not intermingling technology and process issues that we have been dealing with as long as software development has existed. And I think, it's ultimately on our lawmakers, our policymakers in each individual country, and hopefully at the World Trade Organization level, to come up with a clear rules. What is fair use in training? What is fair use in usage of code snippets? Obviously that issue has existed in Google and other Bing and other search engines as long as they existed. Every time you Google something, it actually shows you already 3-4 lines of text from that page. Clearly somebody has decided that is fair use for Google, or at least we have accepted that status quo. For Copilot, today the Copilot in market actually has a feature that you can enable on each individual account, or that businesses can enforce across their whole organization, which what happens is model inference runs and the model spits out some code. We take that code and we match that to any public repo on GitHub. Doesn't even matter what license it has, as long as that code snippet is over 150 characters and exists in any existing public repo, we will not output it to you. And so that way, if there's a long, complex algorithm that exists already in some repo, we will not output it into your editor. And so that way, you could make the argument that Copilot actually writes better code than the individual developer, because it doesn't accidentally repeat code that already exists in a repo under a certain license. We already announced, and we are currently, in private preview testing a feature that instead of blocking the output, it actually opens a tab, a new tab in your editor, and it shows you all the findings on GitHub with the attribution, like with repo, which author, which license. And so can you make your own decision and basically actually do proper attribution of code that matches code that already somebody else invented. And that way, create a better world in many ways than just copy and pasting code without any attribution. And I think that's where the industry will go, that we will create, a more common understanding across all developers. What is fair use? What needs to be attributed, and what is off the limits for you individually and for companies.
I think there's also a really interesting opportunity to invent a business model for that. Sam asked me quite a while back if they could train GPT on O'Reilly books, and I said, well, yeah, sure. As soon as you can figure out how to attribute the stuff and figure out a way for us to pay our authors, and I think we'll get there. I don't see why we can't get there. There were all these, again, all it takes is a little bit of sense of history. There were people who were going, oh my God, Google is making a copy of all my content. And they go, yeah, but they're giving you an index, and some of that content might be behind a paywall. And it's good for somebody to know and point you there, and you get there and you go, oh, I got to pay to use this. And there could be something like that in, effectively where the model says, okay, here's this really useful thing, and I can tell you, but you have to be a subscriber, or this is available for, I've evaluated these solutions. There's a really good one here. I don't know if it's going to work out that way, but it could. And
well,
we are
beyond
in this process where we have to invent business models as well as technologies.
Well, beyond AI, we are already, getting there with GitHub sponsors, and so we are enabling now companies to look at the dependency tree of what open source components they're using. And so this is not about AI and snippets. It's about all the libraries that you're already using, and everybody does it, right? 90% of written software depends on open source, whether it's your Linux kernel, whether it's a programming language, or thousands of libraries. Whenever you start a React project, you immediately have 1,000 open source libraries in your project. And so we enable companies to look at their open source dependencies and then donate money via GitHub sponsors to those projects based on the usage. And in fact, we have done that at GitHub and at Microsoft ourselves repeatedly over the last years, that we identified the most commonly used open source libraries that we use for building our products, and we donate money to those open source projects via GitHub sponsors. So I think that's kind of like the path you're outlining. If you have attribution of what the model generated, and then policymakers, lawmakers, and ultimately the tech industry needs to figure out what is, big enough of a suggestion that it justifies, some contribution to the original author, versus just saying, well, this is, 3 characters, the word,
Yeah, I think that's totally right.
Hopefully the word O'Reilly doesn't give you 10 cents every time I mention it.
But I agree. I'm pretty sanguine, actually, about that we'll figure out useful models here, and despite being in the copyright business, I think that in general copyright is to encourage creativity. We've put out books under free licenses. We've put out books under copyright, and it's always like, what's going to create the most content and the most value? And right now, I think this stuff is going to create enormous value for people. And I think back to the early days of open source and a conversation I had with Larry Wall, the creator of the Perl programming language. I said, why did you make Perl open source? And he said, because I've gotten so much great free stuff from others, and I wanted to give something back. And I think that, you look at if you think about the future culture of how much we're all going to be enabled by these tools, and then you go, wait, I'm actually getting more than I'm losing, and this notion that I mentioned earlier in the earlier Q&A about progressive taxation is a really good model, because there's maybe a place in the middle where it's going to be squirrely, but for a lot of people, there's going to be these benefits that are far greater than anything they have to lose. There's going to be some people who are already doing so well that they can afford to lose something, just like with progressive taxation. And then there's maybe people in the middle where we have to really figure out something because it's a hard trade-off. But it's never going to be one size fits all.
And we have gone through this with the music, right? Like we went from you had to buy CDs to Napster was evil to now the Spotify model, if you will, is kind of the accepted state of the art. And I'm sure we will go through another iteration of that model by when music is AI generated, and you saw the dispute about the Drake video last week. And I think, that's just the next phase of that same conversation. And similarly, remember the early days of YouTube, where everybody thought this is, only going to be used for pirated videos. And today, that's really no longer a problem. YouTube monetization, if I use, a snippet from The Mandalorian, Disney gets a cut. I think that's my understanding, at least how that works. And so that's we, in a way, we have figured that out to a certain degree, and we will keep going on that journey.
It's interesting, though. It does that story does illustrate something important. YouTube was the music industry was very vigilant, and they pushed very hard. And so there is kind of a better compensation regime on YouTube than there is on the web in general. Piracy is probably more rampant in the text-based world of the internet because there was never that need to come up with that compensation scheme. But it does indicate that it is possible to say, oh, this little bit of something got used, and this is fair use, and this isn't, and we're going to pay a part of a revenue stream for this. And I think we could totally figure that out for these models.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly easier, to detect similarities in text than it is in videos. In a way, it's sometimes funny how that works. That it's much harder, to scan all the videos and find reused music and video snippets and images than you would think it is scanning similarity with text. I guess there wasn't the commercial pressure in the past that we had to solve that problem, so we solved the harder problem first. But it's definitely technically possible.
So I want to switch tracks a little bit because, GitHub Copilot was in many ways one of the very first big successes in this field. You could also look at obviously DALL-E and Midjourney and generative art, but then along comes ChatGPT, and there's a very different user interface paradigm between Copilot and ChatGPT. ChatGPT obviously is this chat interface. Copilot is really much more like a autocomplete on steroids on steroids on steroids. So what do you think about these two different models? The Copilot model, which of course Microsoft is expanding to other applications besides code editors, and the versus the chat model in our future.
It's funny that you called it steroids. I know a professor from an East Coast-based university who called a Copilot steroids without side effects, which I kind of like the idea of. You can just go into a Walgreens and buy steroids and have no side effects, right? We would all go and buy a ton. It's funny, it's always, this is how life works. And in 2020, when we got access to GPT-3, our GitHub Next team looked into what can we do with this model, and OpenAI provided this codex model that was trained on source code instead of language. And we had three ideas. Code to text, as in have the model explain code to us. And we thought that's not good enough. It often does, explain something that's not quite accurate. That was 2020, 3 years ago. Text to code, which is what we built, Copilot today. And then conversational coding, which effectively is chat. And at the time we thought, it's not useful enough, and the conversation in 2020 was not good enough to enable such a feature. This was GPT-3, then GPT 3.5, Instruct GPT, and these specially tuned models come from OpenAI. And last December we were clearly proven wrong in the sense of chat works fairly well. Actually, it works so well that it became the fastest growing product, fastest to 100 million that the internet has ever seen. And so I think, it unlocks a new use case that Copilot today can't really deliver, which is this kind of conversation. It's the argument with your pair programmer. It is, in fact, the better pair programmer than the Copilot that we have today, because you can talk to it and you can ask questions, and you can, if you don't like what your human pair programmer tells you, you will also have an argument with them. If they have a bias, and we all have biases, let's not pretend that a human exists that doesn't have any bias and no beliefs. You argue with them, and then you hopefully compromise in what you're putting into your file in real pair programming, and that the chat scenario enables exactly that same user interface paradigm within AI. And so we announced about a month ago Copilot Chat as part of Copilot X, our vision for the future. It's now rolling out to users on the waitlist. We have seen fantastic interest from developers on trying out Copilot Chat, and more so when people try it, they're blown away. It's one of friendly CEOs emailed with me over the weekend, and I gave him access, and he's like, "Holy fuck! This." I asked it to fix all the errors in my notebook, and it did. This was Python notebook, and it was really this moment where you realize this is going to change the world, because you can just ask it to solve a problem for you, and it can engage with you. And so I think the chat scenario will be the future of Copilot. It will be the future of software development, and auto-completion will still remain useful, and remains one of the features that we're so used to as a user-face interface paradigm. And so coming back, why did we pick that one? Well, we're already working in that world. You type something, you make an error yourself. You get a code snippet from Stack Overflow that is almost never exactly what you need, and you always have to modify it. So auto-completion is great. You type, you see something that's close enough, you press the tab key, and then you go in and edit it and to your liking. And then you have unit tests, hopefully, that tell you whether you got the wrong suggestion or not. So I think they play together, and they will both be the future of AI-assisted programming.
All right. Well, listen, we're out of time. I would love to keep talking because there's so many more things I'd love to ask you, but we need to wrap.
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for everybody.